Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. How does a year and a half turn into 40 years? You got to mess things up pretty badly to make a year and a half journey into 40 years. I've been lost before, but I've never been lost for 40 years. Today's session and Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School deals with how these people managed to turn a 1.5-year trip from Egypt to Israel into a 40-year journey. God kept them at Sinai for about a year and a half. And from Sinai, he then took them directly to the southern end of the Promised Land and was ready to send them in. His first step in sending them in comes in Numbers chapter 13. Yahweh said to Moses, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I give to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a leader among them." So Moses was to pick out 12 leaders from the 12 tribes and send these 12 men in as spies in the Promised Land. You probably know this story. This probably isn't stuff they didn't teach you in Sunday school. The 12 go in, and they are amazed at what they see. First of all, they see fruits and vegetables that are just astounding. The Bible even makes the comment that one of the clusters of grapes that they found in this land was so big that they had to put it on a pole and carry the cluster of grapes between two men. I've never seen a cluster of grapes like that. That's incredible. They also talk about the giants that are in the land, and they get afraid. Now, something you might want to know, something they probably didn't teach you in Sunday school about those giants. Excavations of Israeli homes, early Israeli homes, have shown that the center beam is about 5 feet 2 inches off the floor, evidently. Now, if you're building your house and put the center beam at 5 feet 2 inches off the floor, you're probably a pretty short person. You're not going to build a house in which you have to walk through and duck all the time. So I'm guessing, and it appears, that the ancient Israelites were probably pretty short people. And somebody that was 6'2" or 6'3", I'm 6'2", might have looked like a giant to them. At any rate, they're scared. The spies come back from spying out the land, and their report is, we can't take them. 10 of them say that. 2, Joshua and Caleb say, it's not our job, it's God's job to take them. And if it's God's job, he can do it. I say we go. But the 10 said, no, we can't do it. The people are too strong. We cannot do it. The response of the congregation is in Numbers chapter 14. And you might guess what it is, because you've heard this song before, just a different verse. Here it is, Numbers chapter 14, verse 2. Would that we had died in the land of Egypt. You got to kind of whine this, you know. Or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why does Yahweh bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? Now, not only is Egypt the good old days, now they're even thinking about turning around and going back. Surrendering apparently to Pharaoh and saying, hey, make us slaves again. Better than what we got now. As the people's response to the spies' report is predictable, so God's response to the people's grumbling has become sort of predictable. He gets Moses aside, and in Numbers chapter 14, verse 12, he says, stand back. I'll strike them with a pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. And Moses, again in the role of mediator, stands in between an angry God and a complaining people, and pleads for people that don't have a leg to stand on in terms of their presence before God. Pleads for people that don't deserve the mercy that God's going to show them. And Moses says in verse 13, then the Egyptians will hear of it, for thou didst bring up this people in thy might from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land. Moses is saying this isn't going to look good when it hits the newspapers. The people in the lands around here are going to hear that you brought these people out into the wilderness and you killed them out here. That's not going to look good for you, God. Moses is a gutsy guy. He pleads the case of people who don't deserve God's mercy, and he pleads for God's mercy on those people. God doesn't wipe them all out, but there are consequences for their reluctance, for their refusal in reality, to follow him into the land. And the consequences are now none of them who are over 20 years old will go into the land. And so they are sentenced to spend the next 38 plus years in the wilderness, waiting for a generation to die off. It's a sad chapter in Israel's history. What should have taken them a year and a half will now take them 40 years. They recognize their sin. Unfortunately, they take the wrong action as a result of their sin. And at the end of chapter 14, they decide, well, if God wants us to take this land, maybe we'll just go ahead and take it. And they try to take the land without him. They fail miserably. Israelites die. It's not a happy story. And yet God, throughout this story, is a God of grace. In spite of what they say, in spite of what they've done, they are still his people, and he will still see them through to the land that he promised them. You know, God operates that way in my life too. In spite of who I am, in spite of what I've done, he still loves me. He sent his son for me, and he'll see me through to that heavenly promised land.